Why did I write Storyteller Tactics? Well, if you want to know the answer to that, you need to meet this guy. This is 25-year-old Steve. So this is me when I just joined the BBC as a young researcher. And my job was to find and pitch stories to much more experienced colleagues, to journalists and editors. And I was pitching 10, 15, 20 stories a day, every day. And what I was finding was almost all the stories I was pitching weren't landing. So I'd be describing, oh, this is a story. And people going, nah, it's boring. No. And I'd try, okay, well, what about this? No. People just leaning back. And, okay, what about this? Oh, yeah, okay, that's a story. That's a good story. And I'm thinking, okay, well, why? What's the difference? What am I missing here? And occasionally I'd ask people, I felt very embarrassed that I didn't know what was a story and what wasn't. And that was like, oh, this is a bit, I felt kind of inadequate. At one point, that stage in my career, when I was, 25 years old, my editor called me in and he said, I'm not really sure this is the right job for you. And he cut my contract from 12 months to 6. And I'd just become a dad and had a mortgage, and it was like, oh, I really don't need this. So I had to try really, really hard to get it right. And so that process carried on, and I was pitching and listening and pitching and listening and pitching and listening, and also watching other people around me and watching what did they get excited about, what stories were they excited to bring to the newsroom, and how did people react. And I guess what you're doing at that stage in your career very often is you're just mimicking other people. You're watching what other people do, and then you're trying to do the good bits that they do. And so, after a few years, that's what I was doing. I was better. Thankfully, I was better at spotting what I thought other people would think was a good story and bringing those in and pitching those in a way that, my success rate went, gradually up and up, which was good. But I still didn't know the answer why. Why is that a story and that isn't? And I didn't know the answer. And when I asked, it didn't seem other people knew the answer either. They just kind of felt it in their gut. You'd occasionally get people saying things like, if it bleeds, it leads. Meaning the lead story is obvious because it's the one where most people were, died or injured or hurt. So crime stories always lead, and disaster stories always lead. The thing is, we know that's not true. You can't lead every night on a murder story or every night on a stabbing or a shooting or a car crash. It's just depressing. So I knew that wasn't true, but nobody else had a better answer. Anyway, about 10 years in, I'm finally in the stage where I'm producing reliably good stories. I still don't know why. About 10 years in, I was asked by the BBC whether I would volunteer my time to help some charities to tell better stories about their work. And I went away and I did some reading, because I still didn't know why certain things were stories and other things weren't. So I went away and did some reading, and I was reading about 3-act plays and 5-act plays and 12-stage heroes' journeys and these kind of things, and thinking, oh wow, this is amazing, I didn't know this. This is really useful. And then taking that back into the people I was working with and going, hey look, this is what a story is. And that was really interesting. For me, really interesting. It was like kind of starting to lift the lid, to like look under the bonnet of what is actually happening when people are telling a story. And that was great. And I got really excited about that. And the more I read, the more excited I got. Anyway, fast forward to about 3 years ago, and I was working as a consultant in all sorts of industries, helping people tell better stories, and using all that kind of theoretical reading knowledge, plus all that practical experience, and using that to help people say, okay, here's a framework for telling a story. Here's a story arc you can use to tell a story. And I found this really fascinating. What was really interesting about it was, when I was working with people in business about telling their story, and I was explaining how stories work. And with training, you often get kind of these two extremes of information, where at the lowest end, people are going, yeah, that's so obvious, why are you telling us this, right? So fire safety training is often, oh God, yeah, okay. So obvious why are we even learning this? But at the other extreme, it's, wow, this is so complex, I don't get it. Whereas storytelling training was always in the middle. It's like that Goldilocks zone, and nobody found it too difficult, and nobody found it too basic. They all really enjoyed it. That was interesting. Anyway, what I was discovering as I was building my training business was every now and again I would lose, I was not very well organised, I would lose my own training notes and I'd have to remake them because I couldn't find them in my system. And I was thinking, oh, this is so annoying. What I really need is like a little box of cards I can flick through and pull out the right tactic, the right training device when I need it. And so I started sketching out on a piece of paper how that might look. Basically, that is a kind of plan for 12 training card categories. And I'd flick through them and pull out the one I needed. And I'd written that, and about a week later, Charles Burdett emailed me saying, I make boxes of training cards. I've made workshop tactics. I really think people would enjoy Storyteller Tactics. Do you think you could turn your training into a system? I'm going, yes, I could. Anyway, it took about 9 months to write and several iterations, and we ended up with this, Storyteller Tactics, which is 54 cards in 7 different categories, all of which are, you can lift them out of the box and you can apply them. They're frameworks and prompts and exercises to say, okay, here's how you do this aspect of story. Here's why this story works in this way. Here's a story arc. Here's the... all of these things are allowing you to kind of lift up the lid and look inside and think, oh, I see how that works. Oh, that's interesting. I see how my story could be better. So I really like Storyteller Tactics. I really like explaining them to people. I spend hours every week chatting to customers who've bought them to help them use them in telling their own stories. And I find it really satisfying because this is exactly what 25-year-old Steve needed. 25-year-old Steve would have loved a pack of Storyteller Tactics. It would have saved him an awful lot of embarrassment and early career failure, because that is giving you what's inside the box. Here is what's under the bonnet of the engine of story. And once you pick this up, this is like your toolkit, and you're a trainee mechanic, and you can start to tinker with your own stories and make them run better. So that's why I wrote Storyteller Tactics. That's why I still like working with them, because that's what 25-year-old Steve would have done. So he's not alone. Lots of people need help to get their story straight. And that is where Storyteller Tactics still comes in very, very useful.